Okay, so yes, it's very nice to be here and to come to a conference really dedicated to out of field teaching and the professional development of out of field teachers. We've been working on a systematic review and have felt quite siloed within our own institution as a group of people working on this. So it's really nice to be here with you all today and be able to share this. So a little bit about us, and this is very much a work of a teamwork, really. So there's me, the core research team that worked on this systematic review is myself, and then Eleanor and Emma, who are with me today presenting. Eleanor will address some of the methodology, and Emma will share some of the findings. And we also have Emily Perry, who couldn't be with us today. She's at Manchester Metropolitan University. And has had a lot of influence on directing this project as well. We collaborated as well. I want to acknowledge James de Winter from the University of Cambridge and Rachel Hartley from the Institute of Physics. And the whole project was funded by the Gatsby Charitable Foundation. And I would really like to recommend you have a look at the full report. It is available on that link. Is it sliding on? No, it's not. Let me see. Why is that not working? There we are. This is the one, isn't it? Now it should be working. There we go. Can you see the contributors and partners slide now? Yes, perfect. Okay. So yeah, there's a link on there that I really recommend if you have a chance to read the full report, because obviously we can only share so much with you today, and you may be interested in the subset of studies that were ended up included in our review. A little bit about who we are. So our team has a very long experience working in teacher professional development and curriculum design in England, including working with the National Network of Science Learning Centres. Some of our team have been involved in actually designing and delivering a course called the Science Additional Specialism Programme, SASP, or Subject Knowledge Enhancement Programmes, and various programmes that were designed to support teachers of science subjects working out of field. And so we have experience with delivering and designing that as well. We've worked a lot in partnership with the Ogden, Wellcome and the Association for Science Education, and are also involved in initial teacher training. Recently, we did a review of the long-term impact of one of the SASP, the Science Additional Specialism programs. They ran from between 2008 and 2010 in England. And we were actually interested in what were the long-term impacts of this program for the teachers that took part. There's another report on that if you're interested. Again, there's a link there for you to access that to look at that long-term impact. Like many other countries, England is in the grip of a teacher shortage, especially in the sciences. So you can see in 22-23 for physics, it hit just 70% of its target. So a real shortage in this area, which is also where a lot of our work originated, with that focus on the sciences, really. So many teachers are teaching outside of their field, beyond their subject specialism. And since 2008, I already mentioned the SASP and the subject knowledge enhancement courses. They've been running to try and fill that gap and help with that. However, we did our first little study, that long-term study, to look at the impact of it. But we really wanted to get to this point where we could better understand how these programs achieve their aims, and also to have a strong evidence base through which to advocate for similar professional development programs. So for that, with all that background, that's why we started on this systematic evidence review, and that to kind of get what makes these programs work and get a better understanding of that. And we're very much at the start of this here. So these are our research questions that guided the review. Our first research question focuses on getting a better understanding of where OOV may be an issue, and a focus of research. Of course, the two may not be the same, but OOV may be an issue but not researched. So it's very indicative, the results for this question. The second and third research question more narrowly focus on this evidence base behind existing UV professional development initiatives. So the data set behind research question 1 and then 2 and 3 is quite different. So the size of the number of studies is quite different. But Eleanor will say a little bit more about that process. So I'm going to pass on to Eleanor to take you through the methodology now. Can't hear you, Eleanor. That is odd.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'll start again. Don't know what happened there. So the first bullet point is the first set of search terms that we set off with, and those are the dates range that we used. We then did some wider scoping to see if we were capturing everything, and we realised that actually there's a number of different terms that you can see in the third bullet point there that people are using internationally to denote this kind of teaching out of field or outside of subject specialisation. So we actually ended up widening the search terms. This we had a substantially larger return of items, but just meant that we were sure we weren't be missing anything really crucial within the field. So you can see, the widening of the search terms there, and it was a choice between the scale of what we could do, but then also making sure that we got everything that was relevant. So we balanced it out, and we there's a considerable team on this, so we went for the wider search terms there. Thanks, Dee. So in terms of our inclusion criteria, just to say as well, Dee's touched on this. So the research question 1, in terms of where is the research being published for teaching out of field, that was across the wider data set, but these inclusion criteria for research question 2 and 3, which is just to remind you, what is the PD for teachers teaching out of field, what are the characteristics and features of this PD, and what evidence do we have for that? So we were looking at post-qualification out of field secondary teachers, so we weren't looking at subject knowledge enhancement or programs for unqualified teachers. So things like Teach for America, Teach First in the UK, they weren't included. We also had to have studies that were examining the different processes, and it had to be subject-specific professional development, so looking at a specific subject. We were looking at secondary rather than primary school as well, just because there's this idea that primary school teachers are generally more of a generalist teacher. We went through, I'll show in a second the amount of papers we went through. We did find evidence for primary phase or elementary phase teachers and having this professional development, but we excluded those because it was, in terms of the prior training they had, it was a little bit more harder to distinguish between that. We were also looking at out of subject specialism and not phase as well. So not looking at, again, elementary teaching, high school and that sort of thing. We were looking at subject specifically. We did include, as Dee's mentioned, the background to our research and kind of the reason for the funding as well was science education. So in the UK, for example, you can be a biology teacher teaching physics and you're not technically counted as out of field because you're a science teacher. But we did include examples of, for example, a biology teacher teaching physics, but then also obviously a PE teacher teaching physics would be included within our search terms as well. We kept it quite narrow focused in terms of it being structured PD activities, but as I say, we did tag for research question 1 much more widely across the data set to get that idea of where this research is taking place. And we had other tags there as well. So we had out of field teaching experience, professional identity, leadership of out of field teaching beyond subject specialism as well. Thanks, Dee. So this is just an overview of the Prisma diagram we had. So we used Covidence as a systematic review software, and 10% of the 3,000 papers we screened by 2 of the authors team just to get that inter-rater reliability. And we were pretty happy with our results on that. We had a good level of inter-rater reliability calculated through Covidence, kind of the blind reviewing of the papers. And I say we use a tagging functionality quite heavily. It's really useful in this piece of software. So even if you exclude a paper, it doesn't disappear forever from the system. We could tag it, for example, for research question 1. So on title and abstract, we saw that it was about out-of-field teaching in a certain national context. And so we could tag it for that to come back to and review for research question 1. So we could separate the two kind of bodies of literature in that way. And as you can see, the different levels of title abstract screening, full text screening, and then the ones that ended up in the final review. Thanks, Dee.
Passing on to Emma now to share some of the results.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. So I'm going to talk through some of the findings that we got from the 3 research questions. So the first research question was about where was research being published about teachers working out of field. So just from going from the screening process that Eleanor's just talked us through, you can see that the vast amount of literature that we were finding was based in Western European and other states, predominantly in the USA. We were thinking about why that might be the case. So 2 points would be about, the first would be about the background and the context for the work in this area of out-of-field teachers, such as in America, where there's the No Child Left Behind Act that was brought in. So lots of work that's published about that in the USA would reference out-of-field teachers. We also thought about the potential influences in terms of the way that we'd screened the data or screened the literature that we were looking at. We'd used English language terms, so that might have narrowed down where we were finding literature that was out there. Also about output density and geographic bias in terms of publishing. So just to bear that in mind in terms of what we found for this research question 1. So if we go on to research question 2, where we were looking at what forms of professional development were being offered and what were the characteristics. So out of all the studies that we looked at, we found that there were only 31 that actually referenced what professional development activities were happening. So they either described it or they evaluated it. So you can see at the top of that slide, we've got what subjects were being presented. So predominantly mathematics and physics. What we found interesting is that even though there is out-of-field teaching happening in areas such as humanities and social sciences, we didn't find any evidence of what that professional support looks like. So we couldn't unpick what the characteristics were for professional development in those areas. If you look at the duration, predominantly most of the professional development activities that were described or evaluated were long-term. So they occurred over a month. Some of them were on for a year or for 2 years, but there was that commonality of this long-term sustained professional development. So the 4 points at the bottom, first one, obviously, we know that lots of professional development was happening over a long period of time. The second one, we noticed the second theme was about collaboration with experts. So sometimes that took place in terms of the out-of-field teacher was working with university experts, so they would come as a knowledgeable other to work with the out-of-field teachers, or sometimes it was a mentoring model where an in-service, in-field teacher was mentoring the out-of-field teacher. Then we come on to the active learning and the experimentation opportunities we found within the characteristics. So we've got active learning where if the workshop was happening, the teachers would be asked to do some maths beforehand, or they were given opportunity to try out a chemistry practical or a teach demonstration. Or experimentation was they would take the knowledge that they'd got from the workshops and try that out in their classrooms. And then the fourth point is about subject and pedagogical content focus. We found that in all of them, there was this balance between some subject knowledge and some pedagogical content knowledge. There was a difference in balance in different studies, but we did find that there was that balance, which is critical for building confidence and competence for the out-of-field teachers. If we go on to research question 3, thanks, Dee. So on research question 3, we looked at what's the evidence existing that regarding to impact. What we found that although we had 31 studies, that dealt with what the description was or the evaluation was, we didn't find that they all talked about impact. So what did impact look like? So it was very limited of what we can report on here. And a lot of the studies did actually mention that there was need for more research in this field. So of the ones that we've got, 21 reported on what impact was happening from that professional development. 5 of the studies noted there was a broader effect on school community, and only 1 of them actually had longitudinal follow-up, which was just in 1 of the papers. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So we're looking at what kind of evidence exists. We found 2 programs had a really strong evidence base. So one was in America and one, in Arizona, and one was in Ireland. And there was a lot of evidence there. So there was triangulation and methodology. There were multiple papers presented about this, but only 2 programs we found with strong evidence base. So we considered, why is the evidence of impact mixed? It depends how the researchers are looking at evidence, really, and looking at impact. So some of it would be different people are considering out of field in different ways. So they're looking at evidence of impact in different ways. There's also the question about, do out of field teachers ever get entirely brought in field by completing these professional development programs? And the third point would be about motivation for out of field teachers engaging in professional developments. It might be that they're not as proactive or as interested in the subject, and so don't want to engage in professional development. There's a fear of being moved to the out of field subject. And so there's more questions that we've raised from our research. So I'm going to hand over to Dee. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Yes, so that takes us to the discussion a little bit of the findings. One thing that was very interesting for us in this process is that it raised more questions in some ways. It found some answers, but also we had a lot of debate and discussion around what we found. And so we wanted to share that with you. Obviously, one of the main ones were the ambiguities in defining out of field. There really isn't any stipulative definition. There are very different ways in which this is conceptualized. We also chose one way for our review, and that means it's quite hard to draw clear conclusions as well. And OOV is so very contextually driven. So some countries, Eleanor mentioned this as well, for example, in the UK, with science teachers, technically they wouldn't be considered OOV if you're trained as a biologist and you teach physics, but obviously from a teacher's perspective, they may well feel very much out of field and not have that sense of belonging and confidence to be teaching. So context allow for this or don't allow for this, or don't research it. So there are lots of things to consider there. There's also one thing we found really is this very sort of blurred boundaries between OOV professional development and broader professional development. So obviously the features we found and that we presented appear to be broadly aligned with professional development in general. So I think there's certainly more work to be done looking into what makes good OOV professional development. We saw a lot of overlap with various integrated teaching professional developments, and I think there's some of that presented at the conference as well. So we talked a lot about this. When are you an OOV teacher? So if you are integrated, we decided not to say for those who are integrating, for example, language or literacy within their subject, even though they're not language specialists, they're staying within teaching in their subject. So we decided that wasn't OOV, but there's obviously lots of scope for defining that differently. And that's part, I think, what this conference is all about as well. Within that, we still have these questions like what features are really essential. We need to help sort of gain an understanding of the minimum activity required for support. We know time is limited, and we need to kind of understand what is it that OOV teachers really need. And I think a lot more research is needed. Emma already talked a bit about the aspects of motivation and teacher identity, how important they are. There are likely to be a great variety of motivations and dispositions. So I think that's a key point for thinking about what makes good professional development, being very clear on who you've got in front of you. It will be quite different from normal in-field professional development. So why do out of field teachers choose to participate in these subject-specific professional development is a question that still really remains to be answered, and an interesting area for future research. So in terms of where we're headed, so clearly there's no clear consensus on what constitutes out of field. We need more of that. We need to work towards that greater clarity and consistency in both research and policy discourse. We feel this identity construction aspect is a critical part of what we need to look at for effective professional development. So our next step for our review is to actually, we're undertaking right now a narrative reanalysis of some of those selected, what we call the OOV experience study. So Eleanor explained how we were tagging a different level. So we're going back to a small subset of those that didn't necessarily speak to a specific professional development activity, but did speak to the teaching experience, the identity aspect of it, to see if that can give further insight into what is good professional development for this set of teachers. And through that, we're also hoping to we're working towards a new framework that define more clearly out of field, in field, close to field, to help us deal with this question of the inconsistency, maybe support the process towards some clarity about how we would define teachers working in different contexts and in and out of field. And so that's where we're headed, and obviously that's part of what we hope to submit for the special issue. So look out for that as well. So that was our presentation, and obviously we welcome any questions at this point.